Resuming debate, the Honourable Member for Scarborough-Guildwood.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, for this opportunity. I enjoy entering into these debates. Madam Speaker, people are starting to be cautiously hopeful as vaccines roll out and we approach herd immunity. Canadians can dream once again of something approaching normality. What the new normal might be is, of course, anyone's guess. Now, however, some people are starting to turn to thinking about how we are going to pay for the debts and deficits that have been necessarily incurred over the course of the last 14 months. Some 74% of Canadians are worried about the budget deficit. And, Madam Speaker, it's a legitimate worry. The government rightly injected billions in the economy. And if you look at the charts in this 700-page budget, much of the money is actually sitting in Canadian savings accounts. Madam Speaker, I perceive that to be a good thing. Canadians have been notorious undersavers, more spenders than savers. Now, not quite so much. Chart 22 in the budget shows that 8% of nominal GDP over year has been put into savings accounts. That's a huge amount of money, Madam Speaker. It's such a huge amount of money that money will be actually looking for spending opportunities as we emerge from the pandemic. It actually, as it says in the budget documents, may well become a bit of a tailwind to the economy as it sets out the budget. However, what happens when significant excess money is released into the economy? If you will, money looking for places to be spent. Well, Madam Speaker, generally speaking, prices go up. Labor becomes more expensive. The cost of goods and services climbs. And your savings don't get you as much as before. Then you've got another problem, Madam Speaker, and that's called inflation. An article in the Globe and Mail caught my eye the other day, and the article was about the mismatch, or the perceived mismatch, between the Consumer Price Index, CPI, and people's lived experience. The price of shelter rose 2.4% last year, which was consistent with the CPI of 2.2%, well within the Bank of Canada's inflationary band. Meanwhile, the average resale price of a home went up 32%. This is a mismatch between people's lived experience and the official numbers. As one commentator put it, that leads to a cost of living indicator that doesn't quite reflect what consumers see and feel, and an inflation indicator that doesn't quite reflect the long-term cost of owning housing relative to other things we buy. To that point, there is a consistent mismatch between CPI inflation, as StatsCan measures it, and how Canadians typically perceive inflation. The article goes on in great detail as to the various means to measure inflation and the, if you will, quite academic debate, which I will spare you, Madam Speaker. However, in an online survey conducted by the Bank of Canada last year, 55% of the respondents said that a 2% inflation was not a realistic representation of their experience of inflation, while 66% of respondents believe the inflation in Canada is generally higher than 2%. All of the budgetary calculations are based upon a range of 2 to 3% inflation and a clear determination by the Bank of Canada to keep interest rates very, very low. The Governor of the Bank of Canada has repeated himself several times on that point. The reason that Canadians are concerned about the size of the deficit is the fear that it will become overwhelmingly expensive, to the detriment of other initiatives if inflation takes off and therefore interest rates take off. On the present consensus numbers generated by the absolute best economists in Canada, Canada can afford a very large deficit and debt to GDP ratio. Historically, we've actually been here before, Madam Speaker. Post World War II, we had something like a debt to GDP ratio in the neighborhood of 116%. And in 1995, we were named as an honorary member of the Third World. We had a debt at that time of 67% debt to GDP. By virtue of economic expansion and some prudent measures, we were able to deal with those situations which are worse than what we are presently experiencing, which is a debt to GDP ratio of around 50%, give or take, projected forward for the next 5 years. Yet there is a lingering doubt that CPI doesn't quite get the picture right. Not on housing, not on shelter, not on food, not on lumber, not on steel, not on cement. In this morning's Globe and Mail, the article "Copper Hits Record High," the commentary on the rise of the price of copper, which is used for everything from plumbing to electricity to alternative energy, Chinese supply side jitters, and accommodating monetary policy, which is motivating companies to ramp up spending. Virginia-based trader Dennis Cartman said that the monetary authorities, whether it's the Fed, the Bank of Canada, the Bank of Japan, the Bank of England, have been extraordinarily expansionary. Copper, lead, zinc, aluminum, tin, iron ore, steel are telling you something is going on in the global economy. He added this is inflationary, and this is more than just transitory circumstances. It's secular in nature. And this is where it might end badly, Madam Speaker. I started earlier about talking about Canadians having massive amounts of money in their savings account, some of which will go to feed a pent-up demand. What will happen, Madam Speaker, if Canadians go to spend their money and inflation has eroded their pandemic savings account? That will create a lot of very unhappy and very upset Canadians. As that great philosopher Wayne Gretzky once said, Madam Speaker, one should go to where the puck is going and not to where the puck has been. There are indications out there, Madam Speaker, where the puck is going to inflation. And if it goes to inflation, we will have yet another problem. I commend the government on its handling of the pandemic finances thus far. But we as Canadians need to recognize that the inflationary pressures are there. How we handle them will largely determine how we get through this period of quote unquote normalcy. Madam Speaker, I thank you for your time and attention, and I look forward to questions from colleagues.
Questions et commentaires. Questions and comments. The Honourable Member for Calgary, Rocky Ridge.
Well, thank you, Madam Speaker, and my compliments to the member on his speech. This is the type of debate we need to see, where we discuss important issues before the House, and inflation and his concern about it should be duly noted. And I am very pleased to hear him raise it, because we have at the Finance Committee, for example, in testimony from officials and from members of the government and members of his caucus have largely not shared the urgency around getting a handle on ensuring that inflation doesn't harm Canadians in the months and years to come. The lived experience indeed will tell any Canadian that prices on the critical things that Canadians need, like heating homes, rent, the price of a home indeed, which has gone up 30% across Canada during a pandemic. So I'd like him to continue and give us some more concern on inflation.
The Honourable Member for Scarborough-Guildwood.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I thank my colleague for the question. And I'm glad to hear that the Finance Committee is actually debating this issue. I don't profess to be a world's leading economist, but I do have lived through the stagflation of the 70s and the erosion of people's savings and the mismatch between what inflation was doing to their assets and to their income. The issue, Madam Speaker, is whether CPI is actually measuring the right things. And the argument, Madam Speaker, is that CPI measures Canadians' economy well and its inflation well during non-pandemic times. During a pandemic, it may not be measuring quite the right things. And I think that's an interesting debate, and I hope that the Finance Committee carries it on.
Questions et commentaires, l'honorable député de Drummond.
The Honourable Member for Drummond. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I'd like to thank my colleague for Scarborough-Guildwood for his speech. He mentioned inflation and purchasing power, which is diminishing quickly under the current circumstances. So I have some questions about the position of my colleague and his party. When it comes to increasing old age security at the age of 75, he mentioned the many complaints from people who are complaining about losing their purchasing power, including seniors, especially from 65 to 74. They're complaining about the injustice made by the decision to increase old age security at age 75 and up. So I'd like to hear what the Honourable Member thinks about this sensitive issue. The Honourable Member for Scarborough-Guildwood.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And it is an issue, but the first point I would make is that if inflation does take off, it erodes everybody's purchasing power, seniors and non-seniors alike. The second point I'd like to make is that the government had to pick up one age, whether it's a 70 or 75 or even 80 or whatever, because the government's finances are not unlimited. And therefore, the choice was to support those who are the most vulnerable. And it was deemed that those people who are over 75 have the least flexibility in their financing and therefore need the most support most immediately.
The Honourable Member for Churchill, Kiiwetinoong-Aski.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. As we know that there is a fair deal to look at in this budget, but one of the areas that we have yet to see action on from this government is when it comes to reinforcing the powers of the Canadian Ombudsperson for Responsible Business Enterprise. This government has failed to create an independent office with real powers to investigate abuses and redress the harms caused by Canadian companies, particularly mining companies operating abroad. This is not acceptable. We know that Canadian mining companies the world over are wreaking havoc. How important does this member believe it is for the government to step up and have the power to stop the rampant exploitation we are seeing companies engage in the name of our country?
I have to give the Honourable Member for Scarborough-Guildwood about 10 seconds for an answer. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I thank the Honourable Member for raising the question. 3 points. One, the Ombudsperson is a serious person and very capable. 2, the government did give her a decent budget. And 3, she's right, we should have the appropriate suite of powers for the Ombudsperson. Thank you.
Resuming debate.